Keith Bradby it's slightly different to what's on your program. Keith is going to speak first. He is a long-time advocate for the ecological values of southwestern Australia. He's worked as a builder, beekeeper, seed collector, mining consultant and ministerial policy advisor. He represented WA in development of the original National Landcare Program, managed and reformed the original Peel-Harvey catchment program, and drove the process that ended large-scale land clearing in southwestern Australia. He's been a filmmaker and author, sits on the executive of the WA and National Landcare networks. For the past 13 years, he's worked with a wide array of groups and individuals to lead the Gondwana Link project. Keith's going to speak. The title of his presentation is 250 million years old and still going strong, or is it? Thanks, Keith.
Right. G'day. Which way do I point this to get it to do it? To the laptop. Yes. I can do two things at once, trust me. It's sort of... No, it's frozen. Not me. Clock hasn't started yet, Penny. But it's a great photo, isn't it? And gotcha. Right, let's try it again. So I've only got 15 minutes, so I thought we've got to be a small, tight topic that we can just wrap up in that period of time. There it is. And I'm going to start with the things I'm not going to talk about. So we're not going to talk about volcanoes. No need to. Mountain building, mass erosion, new young streams. Now, glaciers. What would I know about glaciers? Earthquakes, well, you know, I've had the earth move for me a few times, so I don't think it's the right topic for today. Where I really want to go, though, is one of the early historical photos from up at Lake Grace. Now, you can see the river in the background. It was a river back then. This is the Big Avon system that carved out the Perth Canyon. Ranger Hills in the background. Well, they've dissolved very slowly over time and it's sort of filled the river in a bit. So it no longer looks like today's Amazon is what it once looked like. And, of course, a couple of 100 million years of sea breeze, and it's gone a bit saltier. So some of you would be more familiar with a different Lake Grace. And I couldn't get an early enough photo, so this one's still got dinosaurs in it. But the most fundamental fact I think we need to know about southwestern Australia, and I'm not going to confine myself to the south coast, the fundamental thing we need to know about southwestern Australia is it is immensely old and it has had biological continuity. It's been vegetated and inhabited by various ecosystems for over 250 million years. And I think it's starting to be pushed back to closer to 300. That is an unimaginable length of time for life to be in one place. So to give you another historical photograph, these are quite rare, these historical satellite photos, but there's an early shot, and if we take Steve Hopper's word for it, and who wouldn't, we are one of only 3 parts of the world that have retained their biological life for that immense period of time. And a number of you would be familiar with Steve's Ocbil and Yodful theories, which I still don't know what they all stand for, but I do know it says you've got an immensity of really old landscapes which are totally ancient and evolved amazing systems, and then on the coast and the river valleys you've got this pioneering sort of peppermint and what have we. We've lived through... I'm going to do a lot of back to the 80s because, I never really left them today. And since the 80s, the southwest has been discovered biologically. And the wonderful work that's happening offshore, where we're starting to discover our marine wealth, poor, infertile, sandy, substrated ocean, is what's happened with the 80s. I worked in the 80s with botanist Ken Newby, whose batting average, the farmer turned botanist from Ongarop, batting average was a species new to science for every day in the field. And he basically tripled the plant list for Fitzgerald River National Park in a decade. And I was there on the day where a bunch of Friends of the Park people and Alex Baines from the Herbarium basically doubled the known mammal list. So you've been on the edge of biological exploration, and that's why we're now recognised as one of the global hotspots. We used to call it the knee-high rainforest then. We didn't know how right we were. And I'm not going to show the video, but do yourselves a favour, go to YouTube, look up Minute Earth, look up why poor places are more diverse. It's a great explanation of why we are now ranked up there with the tropical rainforests of the world for biological richness. Bloody awkward though if you happen to be wanting to widen a road or build on your block or what have we, because just about everywhere there's something that's nowhere else. It's a weird and wacky southwest. There's no getting over it. The immensity of mechanisms that have been developed by the plants and animals to cope with this old place, the infertility and so on, is something we're still not grasping. One of the mechanisms is to stay put. It's a dominant mechanism. It's not everything doing it. If you go to the northern hemisphere where they do have glaciers and stuff, you know, everything throws its seed up in the air and spreads them around and pioneers. Down here, no. Stay put. Drop your seed where you are, largely is how it happens. As one example from the animal world, no one's talking on spiders today, so I'm safe. Barbara York Main, a bit of a local hero, you know, has been working on spiders and trapdoor spiders across the wheat belt for 45 years. And treks up the Wongan Hills every year to check out a whole group of trapdoors. What's not as well known is that it's often, well, in one particular case where she has been able to determine it, it's the same spider. So little animals, one spot, last a long time, conserve their nutrients, a whole heap of mechanisms to get other nutrients. In the plant world, I'm not qualified to speak on any of this ecological stuff, but I'm a little less unqualified for plants. You've got a whole heap of stuff like the Sterlingias and the Dasypogans, which aren't changing. They've got they haven't evolved into anything else for tens of millions of years. That's remember your button, that's a 48 million year old Banksia fossil. Looks pretty similar to me. I'd reckon it's Banksia attenuata. On the other hand, and this is just a few examples from the eucalypts, Adenanthus and grevilleas, you can actually drive or walk across this landscape and see evolution happen. My favourite has always been how Grevillea trivetita on the western side of the Fitzgerald goes through its medium stage and then becomes Grevillea macrostylus. But you see it in lots of groups. So there's a mix of exciting stuff happening there. And then came the glaciers. So without making a value judgment on the worth of agriculture and the need to feed the world and the incredible way our farmers have produced really well from a reasonably infertile soil, the reality is ecologically, you know, agriculture has been the equivalent of glaciation. The memory of 250 million years was in the plants and animals and about this much of the topsoil. And once you remove that, it's the biggest change to the ecosystems of the southwest for hundreds of millions of years. And here we go, back in the 80s. I'm not saying there hasn't been some good science done since, but I am sticking to some fundamentals. These two statements from the WA Museum work, the first biological survey of the wheat belt in the 70s, are absolutely fundamental for understanding the position we're in. Regardless of what we do, there are very, very few reserves big enough for the animals that we all love to survive. In plants, we'll probably hang in there as long as the weeds and that aren't knocking them around. But for birds and mammals, there's not much out there that's big enough. The only wheat belt reserve that meets that criteria is Lake Magenta. And this picture from the Fisheries and Wildlife magazine of the early 80s, you know, it has elements. It's a bit unfair to say, but it has elements of our current approach, which is still the ambulance, the emergency ward, hand-pollinating the last 9 known stylidiums of that species in amongst a shattered habitat. I'm not going to spend much time on whether the system's stuffed. I mean, ecologically, there is no upward trend across the whole thing. There are improvements. There's a list of mammals and their trends. It's hard to read, but trust me, they're all there, basically from here to Kalgoorlie or the other side, that Andy Chapman from Ravensthorpe was kind enough to draw up for me in 1984. And you will note an awful lot of downward arrows. There's been a few changes. Tony Friend has done a magnificent job establishing some small populations of numbats, the ones that Ravensthorpe were breeding a few years ago, of dibblers and a few other things. Possibly one species that I know of, Smithopsis crassicordata, which seems to like stumps in paddocks, is doing well. But, you know, I'm happy to argue the toss with someone. As far as I can work out, mammals, consistent downward trend. Birds, a lot of you would know Dennis Saunders. Dennis is only a few years younger than me, older than me. Oh, well. Right, speed up, she says. When Dennis came to WA to work on carnabies because they were a pest. And I think it was because the electricity thing, you know, they used to blacken the sky so much that everyone would switch on the lights and collie would go berserk. But in our time here, people my age, we have seen species like this absolutely crash. There's the bad news. Western ground parrot, William Webb, up on Stirling Terrace. They were once so common that William Webb used to sell their skins and tail feathers to the cruise ships in about 1900. And of course, the opportunists are taking over the country. We're seeing a gross simplification. He didn't actually say survival of the fittest. He says survival of the most adaptive. Now, unless Monsanto's got some cute trick up its sleeve with species, we can't actually work on helping species adapt. We can only work on systems. There's a rough definition of what an ecological system is. We're still finding our species. We don't understand our system. Put 10 ecologists in a room, you'll get 20 definitions. Right. The good Paula Deegan, who gets dragged all over the country and internationally doing conservation planning, is just back from Malaysia, helping a whole mob do an Asia-Pacific set of programs. They've come up with this climate-smart conservation word. I think it's where we need to go. Reconsider goals, not manage for change, not just persistence. I think ecologically that's possibly the critical phase. Climate model, all due respect, Pandora, but climate modelling outputs are suspect, so use scenarios. And I know I show that cartoon a lot, but let's not do too many more metres of reports before we get stuck into stuff. We've got to go back to the ecological fundamentals that we knew in the 70s and 80s and work from that. Yes, that's what I do. You weren't going to get away without an ad. I'm going fast, and we use a great conservation planning tool that is adaptive and does give you focuses on a series of results, not a series of activities, progress measured through a series of if-then, and you can have long time frames. We've helped groups across the link do those plans. I apologise for the groups here because we've been a bit distracted out here for a year or two, but we are rounding up some dough at the moment to come back and help with whatever you want to do with your plans. Critical thing is we are trying to help the local groups, and NRM, South Coast NRM and others are also pouring resources in, work on their achievable targets locally, but also put it in that broader functional context. These, best we can work them out, are the key ecological functions across southwestern Australia we need to start thinking about an awful lot more in order to give the bush the ability to bounce back from climate change. I can probably skip that because, no. Let's not assume that the structures that got us here are the structures that are going to carry us forward. And I can buy me a beer tonight and I'll talk at great length over that. But overnight a friend sent me this stuff on networking from the Stanford Social Impact Review. Generous collaboration. I like that phrase. Last couple of points. one of the key functions is connectivity, and we're doing conflicting things. We can't have these conferences and talk about the need to prepare for climate change if these ecological management units, the main vectors of seed across the southwest is not the plants, because they don't do that, but these ecological management units, or emus for short, do move seed around the landscape, and they're one of the species whose movement we deliberately impede because it conflicts with agriculture. I know it conflicts with agriculture. We've got to work our way around that. There is one mammal species that is highly mobile, still got great connectivity, and we need to factor into our planning, and I don't see them factored in there enough. Perth is going to get, 3, 4, 5 degrees hotter this century? Where are they coming to live? They're coming down here, they're coming to the southwest, they're going to live right on the coast. It's one of the reasons we work inland. However you work that out and where you should prioritise, that is the big mammal movement that is going to impact on our part of the world in the next 50 years. We're on a really interesting journey. I hope we can find some of it a bit exciting. Thank you.